secrets, and these are and they go through security audits and so on. A lot of these large companies will run security audits, and they want to make sure that practices are in place to make sure that there isn't flow of information. In fact, I was there recently, and we've got Microsoft employees in one building and IBM employees in a different building. And you set all kinds of mechanisms, and I'm sure Alok does that as well, so that you sort of actually make it very difficult, even accidentally, for some information to cross over.
For outsourcing companies, it's a premise that those things are protected. I mean, when the Microsofts go to one of the promotes company, I'm sure one of the due diligence is to make sure that those walls are set in security, and that's true with our outsourcing company in China as well. But what's more interesting is within the company. Like, for example, you have a semiconductor company, a design company that's just based here, but it has all the R&D in China. And what's interesting is how do you set up so that employees within the company don't steal the stuff and walk away? I think that's a bigger challenge on the IP side. And for those kinds of design, we typically go in and help and make sure that our technology partner goes in and makes sure that the blueprint and the design pieces are all delineated, so nobody in China really has the entire picture. And for example, the servers don't have hard disks. You cannot even put a USB stick in. I mean, it's just a thin client. There's many things you got to do. And in a way, it's really interesting to see how the Chinese operations really manage this, because they themselves know, in other organizations, learned how to steal IP, so they are really, really good at protecting it, because they know how to steal it. It's like a ex-hacker being one of the best security experts, and I think that dichotomy exists, and it's very, very interesting.
In some development organizations, the printer only sits in the manager's office, and you can't print anything unless it goes through the manager. But those are pretty typical things as well. Next question. Can you put the microphone closer to your mouth, please? Thank you.
Do software development outsourcing. So my question is about bubble or boom for software outsourcing, development outsourcing. And David, you are one of the pioneers in, funding the China software outsourcing company, when at that time none other VCs probably would touch Chinese outsourcing company. And now last week we have this announcement about one software outsourcing company in China get $45 million funding. So my question is, one of the telling sign of bubble is everybody try to rush into that business. And the VC also competing for deals, and then the evaluation, is getting really high. So what do you think? Is it bubble or is it boom right now?
I think there is a little bit of bubble going on, but I think the fundamentals of outsourcing in China, it's never going to be as large as India. I mean, make no doubts. I think China's going to be maybe a quarter of the size of India, probably 10, 15 years from now. But the dynamics of the outsourcing market in China is very interesting, because it has both the semiconductor side and the software side. And there's also another interesting dynamic, which is, for India, the biggest customer is the U.S. for outsourcing. In China, the biggest customer is not the U.S., it's Japan. Okay? And we invested in a company called Sinochem maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and went public in Hong Kong. And all they did was outsource software for Japan. And now that the U.S. companies are now outsourcing software in China as well now, partly because India is getting a little bit too expensive, and the parity cost is kind of getting similar. But also strategically, China is an important market. But the fundamental growth is there, and I think it's still very, very small compared to India. It can sustain all the capital that's been going in the last 2 years. I think 8 years from now, if people are still pouring in, $50 million at a time, I'd be worried. But I think the fundamental thesis of there should be an emphasis kind of company coming out of China, I think that thesis is absolutely right on.
Yeah, I agree. I think we see from this end as sort of trying to find the best engineers in Silicon Valley extremely difficult. And as long as the companies in China, the outsourcing company, figured out how to really move up the food chain, not just doing something very, very basic, but start to do a little bit more innovative work, we can double, triple, 10x that kind of workforce, and so it's way from over.
Good. Do you have any other questions? Here we go, in the back.
Hi, I was wondering if the panel could comment on the contrast between infrastructure capability between the two countries, China and India, because India is really, sorry to say, but dismal in the infrastructure area, and I'm wondering if there's any lessons learned that China can, that India can take from China.
Well, centralized government helps.
Change the lawyers to engineers, that would help too.
Exactly. We need to stop having poets in India as rulers. The other thing that I was going to ask was about tier 2 cities in both countries versus the tapped out cities like Bangalore, Shanghai, and Beijing.
See, I think, there is just too much goes around about contrasting the two countries, and fundamentally, yes, they're both in Asia, but it's very hard to contrast them. We made a joke about it, but India is a democracy. You can't put a highway for 10 years because people will take you to court. And unlike US, there are 34 million court cases which are hanging in the Indian courts. So I think infrastructure will take some time. Let's not kid it. It's going to take its own time. India is a democracy. Whether we like it or not, it's not going away. And China, at least right now, good engineers at the helm. They know how to create a project plan, and they rush through the project plan. The two very different countries. But there is another aspect of it. In India, the way it has come up is, if you look at India's total GDP as of 2005 April, it was $800 billion. It's about half that of China. Growing at 9%, 5% inflation. So it's going to be about $2 trillion in 2012 financial year, 5.5 trillion in 2020. But it's a services-dominated economy. 55% of the growth is services. 20% is manufacturing, and 25% is manufacturing, 20% agriculture, which is very different from China. And that has a lot to do with the infrastructure. India cannot have more manufacturing because you just don't have a highway from Delhi to Mumbai to go to a port. So till that comes up, manufacturing will continue to lie low.
Let me address your tier 2 cities, because it's very true. A lot of these companies now are looking at tier 2 cities. In fact, the company that I'm on the board of, Persistent, we've got companies in Pune, which is not technically tier 2, but you could call it a tier 2 city compared to Mumbai and so on. But even from there on, they've got operations in Nagpur and a couple of other places where it's a lot easier to find engineers. You don't have that same level of employers looking for engineers and so on, and so the turnover is less. So I think you're going to see a lot of tier 2 cities come up, and there's a lot of work going on in North India with STC zones and STP zones.
So let me comment about China as well too. The infrastructure in Beijing and Shenzhen and Shanghai are very impressive, but it's a big country, and to some extent, it's a veneer of those things. If you go outside of those cities, there's still lots of development. The Chinese government has an initiative to try and move 200 million people from the inner and western regions to the coastal cities because of labor shortages and things like that. And there are also some very excellent universities. The government, as they tried to create universities as well as centers of excellence, spread it around to different provinces, not just to the tier 1 cities. So, there's a long way to go. I think the number one threat that the central government has identified is trying to make the tide rise